because it's quite involved, I thought I would do another tutorial about making things looking like they're glowing. And for this, I thought I would do something like glowing coals, and that allows us to use a couple of special effects. So I'll begin with a stone. I want a fairly round stone or tall stone like that for my effect, just as a starting point so I can set the material up. So I'm going to go into the material lab. Now it's actually given it quite a useful material, but what we're going to do is go to the library, go to the Pro materials, which you should have, and in this DPack one I'm going to take this advanced shale material. So this is going to be my coal material. If I use actual selection here, that allows us to look at the lump of coal, so I can design my material. In the ambient channel then, I'm going to provide an orange, so that's 100% red, about 50% green, no blue. That gives us an orange colour for the ambient channel. The menu stayed there because I'm recording this in Camtasia Studio and sometimes it goes a bit wonky. And the ambient channel I'm going to put under control of channel D here, and I'm going to check that we've got alpha scaling checked. I'm going to make sure it's object space mapped, and I'm going to turn the ambience up to 100. Now you can see it's abducted this checker pattern. Well, I don't want that checker pattern, so hold the shift key down. I can go into the texture library, I go to basic and take this basic altitude. Because it's object space mapped, this now refers only to the object, so we can lift this lump of coal up and down and it'll still stay mapped with this altitude map. At the moment it's not doing very much for us, so we'll go into the edit texture menu and we'll try and find out what direction this is mapping the ambient for us. So I'm going to increase the frequency until we see, right, that's not convenient, the top of the coal is glowing, and for the idea I've got in mind, it's going to be like some glowing coals. It's going to glow from underneath. So you can see this as a positive value. We can reverse this filter without even going into the deep texture editor by putting a negative value in here, and you can see it's making the bottom of the coal glow. So use this offset and make it positive values. It's actually lifting it up for us because it's negative scaled here. So I'm going to reduce that to, I don't know, somewhere in the region of 100 and lift that up so about half the coal thing is now glowing. So that's our lump of glowing coal. So it's looking a bit lonely there, so I'm going to also use the random replicate feature. That's edit, random replicate, and I'm going to make a few more, 200. So that's made a load of them, and it's also rotated them all different directions, which I didn't really need. So I'll change views, and then if I hold Control and Alt down, you'll see that number 1 appears there next to these control points. That means I can reset the scale of all those lumps. Now I'll select the middle stone as well and lift them all up in the air, scale them down to be very small so they can't land on one another, and then drop them down, so that means they're all on the plane. So and then I can scale them back up again. Whoops, it's gone too big. Right, so now I'll just move the camera around a bit so you can see what we've got. We've got all these lumps of coal which are, well, slightly buried, so you can see that they're underground. So I'm going to get rid of the ground plane. What I'm going to do is convert that into a terrain, and then if I hold Control and Alt down again, I can reset the size of that terrain and then enlarge it so it's about as large as this selection of coals. Now I'm going to edit the terrain and make sure it's solid. I'm going to new picture and just use some mounds to create some lumps in it, and then some mounds again, so I've got this lumpy effect, and then use raise lower to make sure the tops of the mounds are sticking up in the air. And this is going to be the bed of the fire, so I'm just going to shrink that down in that direction, and if I select a stone and then the terrain and then go into the material lab, it'll transfer the material from that stone onto the lumpy terrain. So that now gives me some underside to the fire there, so it just makes it look a little bit more complicated. And lifting that up a bit so that the coals are resting in the fire. Right, now what the last thing I need to complete this part of the project is an effect of flames. So I'm going to create a cube and enlarge that cube so it's about the size of the fire bed again, and then squish it down a bit, just have it protruding slightly over the surface. And if I go back into the material library and go back into the selection here, I've got one under PAL here. There's this sort of a fire effect, so I'm going to combine that with the ambient effect that I've already set up. We'll create some hot spots in the fire. I'll just lower that down so it's not poking out too much. So I can always adjust that as I go along just to get the effect I'm looking for. Lift that up a bit. So that, and if I want to make the fire brighter underneath, because we're only using the grey global ambient here, if I make that now fully white, it'll drive the ambient effect further and make the fire look hotter. So I'm going to take all this lot now, group it together, go into the Create tab there and find a empty library, and add that, and I'm going to call that Fire Bed. So that has now been added to the library as a complete thing. So the next stage, having done this and established my fire bed, is to create some kind of interest in this scene. It'd be a bit boring if it was just a picture of some coals. So what I'm going to do is use something I've made before. I'm going to go to brycetutorials.info, Bryce downloads, and in here I've got Bryce Pro Advanced Lighting 2, and I've got two images here of this red hot metal pin. And this one's uses HDRI lighting with direct lighting, and this one uses true ambience lighting, and that's the one I'm going to go for. And because I've already saved this as an object, I can just overwrite this scene. So if I drag and drop or reload this scene which I prepared earlier, now the aim is to incorporate what I've got here with the existing object that I've created. So I'm going to do in here first of all is go into the render options, turn depth of field off, reduce the rays per pixel so it renders a bit faster, and switch to TA scattering correction, because with the Bryce 7.1 update I've got this new feature here, TA scattering correction, that actually improves the quality of the true ambient rendering method. So having done that, I'm going to have a look at the top of this scene and look how things are orientated. So now I've got a ground plane here. I check the attributes, I can see it's locked. I thought it looked a bit grey, and I'm going to convert that into a terrain, and I edit that terrain and I'll make it solid, use new and invert, and looking at the way it was orientated up here, I'm going to carve in a square sort of pit. Alright, I guess that's what I'm going to put the fire in. I'll use mounds just to roughen that edge up there. Now I've got that, and I'm going to enlarge the terrain, and it's just underneath these pins at the moment. As you can see, the terrain's rather thin because it's been converted from a plane, so if I use this resize on the y-axis I can drag it down and create a bit of a pit. Not quite sure where that's ended up. It looks like it's just there, which is actually about where I wanted it. The next thing then is, change the view, is I've got this pin on top that's made up of the different components that allows it to have the glow effect. If I can capture that and nothing else, group it so that I can control the entire object in one go, and I'm going to drag it out over the edge of this pit. So I'm just moving that pin over here now. Well, quite what happens in the main view, it's going to be difficult to tell. And obviously I want it to look like it's resting on top of these other pins, so I'll lower that down. I'm afraid it's a bit of a gamble, this. So obviously it's a bit fiddly moving it in 3D. Right, so I've now moved that pin. This is my concern here, is how it's interacting with these other pins. It looks like it's slightly clipping that one, so if I move it very slightly that way, oh, well, it won't look too bad I suppose because I can move back from here. So I'm going to move the view back, and so you can see the idea with this fire pit. This object's already got a light source associated with it, so it's already lighting the inside of this pit up. Now, having done that, I'll go into the Create library and get my fire bed here, which is probably going to be a bit on the big side. And it's all grouped together so I can shrink it down, and then I'm going to try and position it carefully in this pit underneath. So I'll put that in the pit there. I might make the pit a bit deeper, so if I select the other terrain, then I can just use the height thing. So it's made the sides a bit steeper. Get hold of my fire bed again, see whether I've got that lined up in the right position. It's got to be in both directions. So I've got other views I can utilise, though it just gets a bit confusing flicking backwards and forwards between the different views. Line it up in that one and line it up in the side view, and then see if we've got our fire pit in position. Right, it's slowed the render down a bit, but that's because it's introduced a volumetric material there. Now I'm going to lift the fire up slightly, enlarge it a bit, see how that looks. So what I want it to do is to, in some cases, disguise this edge without too much overlapping, and that's got a sort of, it's there to explain why that particular one's got so hot. So I get hold of the cube that's the fire effect and lift that up a tiny bit. See how that looks now. So I've got my fire bed in there, I've got my hot pin hanging over the end, I've got these other ones, I don't know why they're not getting red hot. I should probably move the whole lot away from the edge now. I'll have to select the fire bed and the terrain, and then I can just move the whole lot slightly further away, and then I'll see how that looks. And it's then a matter of choosing an appropriate camera angle for my shot, and then I can turn the effects back on, because I suspect this is going to be quite a long-winded render when it boils down to it. So it's just a matter of setting things up now. So I think what I'm going to do is select all the coals and make them a little bit larger, because I think they were looking a bit puny compared. I'm going to lower this camera angle a bit, but just not so much as we can see the edge of the terrain there, because otherwise the background will peep out. What I'm trying to do is get it so they've got a shot across the coals, got a bit of fire effect coming out, and get a bit more fire effect coming out. That's my cube with the volumetric fire effect, just to brighten that up a bit, and then zoom in, get the pins in. So how's that looking now? I think I'd like to see more of my coals actually, since I've gone to the trouble of making them. So I'll choose a higher camera angle. I still want it to be at a slight angle because I want the depth of field effect to work in my favour as well. Alright, fire bed, I'm going to lift that all up a bit more, closer to the thing, lift more of the fire effect out. See how that looks. Firier. Okay, you can see it's going to be quite a slow render when I do this, because I'm only doing 4 rays per pixel at the moment, and it's still taking its time. Just need to take this group with the pin in and rotate it very slightly so it's not having that collision there. Hopefully that'll overcome that issue a bit. Can't tell really. I suppose if I can't tell, I'm getting away with it, but right, try that now. So to get into the final render then, I know there's a light source in here, the orange glow. I go into render options, choose depth of field, set to current selection, which wasn't much different from where it was before really, and then increase the rays per pixel. That might be a bit too high. I'll try it at 36 and render a small area. Well, I'll render the whole lot and see how long that's going to take. Okay, it's reporting about 15 minutes. That's not too bad, as long as it's not too grainy in the background there. Looks like an appropriate level of blurring. Okay, as you can see, I've given that a bit of a render. The background's a little bit too grainy, so I'm going to have to take the rays per pixel up a little bit, and I'd like these coals to glow a bit more. So if I select all the stones in there and this terrain at the bottom, not the one that's the hole in the ground, and modify the material, I'll just use the terrain as a guide. I can shuffle the effect up and down with this control and get move the glow up a bit on the stones, so they should appear in the render a bit orangier now, so that it looks like it's a bit brighter. And the other thing I'm going to do is select everything and move it up slightly, and the strategy behind that is, I should have moved the camera up at the same time, I'll just drop that down with Ctrl Z, select everything and move it up slightly. Then everything's moving up strangely then. Ungroup, group. Okay, I should be able to move everything up together in one go and see whether the material changes on this hot pin, because if it's world space map I'll be able to move these spots, so you can see it looks a bit whiter there, so it just looks a bit brighter. Just by moving the pin around in the world space, it moves where these patches of light are because of the way that the texture is mapped on that. So I'm going to, as I say, take the render option up to 64 rays per pixel. That'll help reduce the noise generated by the true ambience and the depth of field effect and the soft shadows. They all generate noise, and I'll see how that looks. So I'll give that a render and I'll pause the video. Okay, I think I'll get away with that level of rays per pixel for the depth of field effect, but what I wanted to do, I was looking here, this bit of detail is getting a bit lost along this edge. So if I can edit this terrain, the one that's got the fire pit in it, like this, and I can put a bit in this corner here where that is, and I'll use mounds again to close the sides in, and then I'll use lower rays per pixel to see how that looks, whether I've managed to get that in the right place or whether there's any collision going on. So there. I think possibly my coals are a bit high, so I'll get hold of my fire group, which I think I might have accidentally ungrouped. So I'll just get hold of the coals themselves and the terrain they're on, which is going to be that one of these two. I've just got to work out which one it is. Terrain 2, and I'll go in and I'll just lower that down a little bit so it's actually in the pit, and we'll see whether I can stop that interference there. Still a bit interfery. Try again. Hopefully there'll be an edge at some point. It's just that bit of fire effect coming over the top, I think. Well, I can shrink that down away from that edge. I mean, I could apply it on a different shape as well if I didn't want it to overlap there. I could just transfer it onto a cylinder and then it'll be more in the centre of the pit there, which might be more in keeping. It's gone quite a bit brighter, hasn't it? I'll lower that down. As its volumetric materials change depending on the thing they're applied to. I can see more what's going off in this corner now then. So it's a bit noisy. I'll switch the rays per pixel back up again to a higher level and we'll render that out and see how it looks. As you can see, the render's nearly done, and I've realised that these coals looking a bit reflective, and I think that's because I've left some reflective property in this material, which is probably not the most appropriate choice. So back to fiddling around again. I can't remember which terrain. Oh, that's the terrain. So if I look in the material property, I've got reflection. That'll also slow the true ambience render down tremendously. So I'm going to take the reflection out of that material, and that should improve the render time. Okay, I ran a little test there. That is faster, but it's now looking a bit too light because it was darker before. And one of the things about the true ambience is that it allows light to transfer around. Even ambient in the material becomes a light source. So what I can do is I can reduce the diffusion on this a bit so it doesn't turn so bright. Render a small area. See if that restores the balance a bit. I want it to be light to some extent, but still want contrast in that image. So right, we'll give that a render now. Okay, this is getting closer. A bit glowy here still, possibly. A bit too glowy. As you've gathered by now, these scenes don't happen very quickly for me. They take quite a lot of adjustment. I'm just reducing the level of glow on the coals, taking it down again, because I'm relying on the true ambient to move the light around. So see if we can make it look more concentrated in the fire area and give it a bit more contrast. So that's getting there. I'm just trying to decide how much I can get away with lifting it up before it coincides with the surface of the terrain there and spoils the effect. So, oh dear, this video is overrunning again. I don't seem to be able to stop myself from overrunning. I've just lowered the raise per pixel so I can get a bit of a guide. Obviously you've got to put up with the noise. So that looks okay. These coals are a bit darker now, which is what I was wanting to get a bit of contrast in there. And then I can I'll take it up a very small amount, not too much there, because I'd already focused that effect in. So this is just changing the transition point where the ambient kicks in, so we've got a bit of glow along that edge, but not too much. Okay, I'm back to rendering again with more raise per pixel and see how that one looks. So there you go, the finished render. As you might have gathered by now, I could continue meddling with this and making small changes forever and a day, but at some point I suppose I better call a halt. So that's it, that's the finished render. I hope that tutorial has been some use to you, and encourage you to put your own special effects in your own renders, and that it's been interesting and enjoyable, obviously. Okay, that's it. Cheers now.